Now, to continue this conversation, this past Saturday, March 12th, marked Detrans Awareness Day. It was an advocacy groups, individuals who've suffered the pain and misdiagnosis of the harms of transgender psychology procedures gathered around the country to raise awareness of their stories and about the lack of appropriate treatment options for those who've struggled with accepting their biological sex. Sadly, those who have identified as transgender have shown higher rates of childhood psychological, sexual, and emotional abuse than the general population. To make things worse, the vast majority of professional groups have not advocated for treatment options that address the issues that are frequently found in tandem with gender dysphoria. And joining me now to discuss all of this is Dr. Jennifer Bauwens, who's the director of the Center for Family Studies here at FRC. Dr. Bauwens,
hi,
welcome
Joseph.
back to the show.
And it's good to be back with you.
Now, you heard the conversation we had there with Brenton Netz. He described a situation where his son has autism, and he thinks that is relevant to the experience that he's had with gender dysphoria and just kind of what life has been to this point. How common is it that young people who experience gender dysphoria are also dealing with something else?
Yeah, and well, the truth of the matter is we don't know for sure what the numbers are because there's such a suppression on research that has anything to do or anything that's contrary to the mainstream transgender line. So what we do know, what we see often, and a little bit of data that we're starting to pop up here and there, is that it's really common for children to be diagnosed autistic. The rates of sexual abuse are much higher, especially amongst the transgender population, but certainly amongst the LGBT population as well. And then we also have this whole experience of the social contagion and how much, and Brenton mentioned this earlier, how much social media comes to play or the school ideology comes to play in some of these kids' decisions to decide that they're transgender.
So as an academic, what's your reaction to March 12th, this Detrans Day? It's a new concept, but it's telling very different stories. Much of the LGBT political lobby has made their progress by telling their stories, as they would say, speaking their truth. But this is a different story, and it's a different version of the truth. What's your reaction?
I'm really thankful for this day, because one of the reasons that I got into the field of psychology was to fight for those who didn't have a voice, or fight for those who were, quote unquote, underprivileged in some way. I've worked in the foster care system, and I've worked with folks who've really had a hard way to go. And I've been proud to be a part of a profession that is aimed at helping those who didn't have a voice. And so here you see the detransitioner population, and they've been suppressed by the very people who kind of took an oath that they were going to help those who didn't have a voice. So I'm excited to see that there are people who are saying we're going to stand up for this population, that people do exist amongst this population, that there are folks who have been pushed down and their voices ignored, and that they've actually been ignored by other supposed transgender advocacy groups that are doing anything but advocating for this group of people.
There are communities that are developing, and many of them can be found online, thousands of people telling these stories about detransitioning. From your research and maybe even anecdotes in your conversations, are there themes in these stories that are similar to what these people, their life experience has been?
Yes. I mean, certainly you see a large swath of people who've experienced abuse. I mean, that's the common theme. But some of the other commonalities that you see, and this is from a recent study from Lisa Lippman, and of course, it's not a huge study because, again, there's not a lot of research money out there to investigate this topic, but some of that data shows that almost 60% of the people felt or sorry, 40% of the people felt pressure from their mental health or healthcare provider to trans or go through those types of procedures. And another 40% said that they had an experience of trauma the year before they were advised to transition. So the bottom line is that there are a whole host of other issues that haven't been properly assessed. And in fact, in that study, I believe it was about 57% who said that they weren't adequately evaluated and their other mental health conditions weren't properly assessed, that were later, as they detransitioned, discovered that those were the actual root causes. So yes, there are some commonalities, and when we look at those commonalities, it's not good for these medical procedures. They're not beneficial.
Dr. Bauwens, are there also commonalities that lead people to make the decision to detransition?
Well, I think one of the themes that we see in the Lisa Lippman study is that people start realizing that their quote-unquote gender dysphoria was actually due to other things. And so actually I'm reminded of a story that I heard where this young woman decided to go through all of the transgender procedures, and she said, I checked off all these boxes, and at the end of going through all of these procedures, I was left with my childhood abuse. So we're really not doing these people a service by sort of delaying the treatment of what the real issue is. So if you are someone who's facing this or know someone who's facing it, just remember that this does not solve the problem. It only prolongs dealing with the root issue.
And that is a really important point, because we all want the same thing for these people who struggle with this. We want them to find peace and joy and purpose and meaning. We ultimately want them to find out the reason God made them and the purpose he has for their life. And there's one school of thought that says, look to the way you've been created for insight into your purpose and what God's plan for you is. And there's others that would say the way you've been created is meaningless. Look inside yourself, look to your brain. And obviously those are different approaches that are, of course, leading to different results. But Dr. Bauwens, we appreciate your care and your scholarship and your help for those who are looking for it. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.